All right. Thanks everyone one more time for being a part of our very first section-wide captains meeting. Today we have with us Heather Hawks from USTA National. She started her relationship with USTA 15 years ago when she began her work as a member of the Tennis Link support team and Active Network. Through that time at Active, Heather worked as a supervisor for the Link team, product manager for junior team tennis and adult leagues, where she became familiar with NTRP. The NTRP and work with the National Oversight Group and USTA then continued to be a primary focus for several years. So 5 years ago, she was invited to join USTA National as the manager of Tennis Link and Ratings. And today she is the senior manager of ratings for community tennis, where she does all things NTRP, WTN, and answers all the hard questions. So I hope I got all of that right. Heather, thank you very much for coming. She's also, as a side note, a friend of the section and has presented for us at Tennis Weekend and other places. And this presentation came about because several of our local league coordinators saw a very similar presentation that you gave for Marilyn Sherman and came back with fantastic information from it. And we're very excited to have you. So that was the beginning of all of this. So thanks for coming. And I'm going to let you take it away.
Oh, excellent. Great. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to sharing some information tonight. And I am a fellow New Englander. I'm originally from Maine, just outside of Portland. So I wish I could be there in person. And I mean that wholeheartedly because it is truly my home. I'll take just a second to share my screen here and bring the PowerPoint up. All right, there we go. Tonight's webinar, I'm going to cover a little bit about the NTRP, a little bit of an overview and a history. I'm going to talk about frequently asked questions, DQs and appeals, some myths. I'm going to go through what it means when we say compatible versus competitive, and I'm going to talk about other rating sites. Some of you who are very attentive listeners may notice that you hear me say the same things a few different times. That's because I've done these presentations for several years now, and I've noticed that some of the things are worth saying a few times or maybe saying in a slightly different way. So if you think, didn't she already say that? I may have. I'm really just want to make sure we're getting the information out there. At the end of the presentation, I'll spend a few minutes and go through the section questions, and we will have the chat as well, so questions can be added in there. What the NTRP does. It uses USTA play history and current match results to generate player, dynamic, and year-end ratings. It effectively assigns player levels after only a few matches. And it becomes more accurate with more match results, as with any tennis rating system. What it does not do. It does not identify tanking or other forms of score manipulation. The reason it does not do this is because there's not a mathematical definition of a tanked match. We very closely track players that reportedly are tanking, and there's no consistency in there sufficient to saying these are the kind of matches we'll throw out. For example, a 6-0, 6-0 or a 6-1, 6-1, as you all know, many of those are legitimate matches. So if we were to create a definition, we would end up throwing out good match play. You'll see the bullet point that says work in progress. We're looking all the time at data, and what does the data tell us? What do we know about patterns in player behavior that may indicate tanking? And what can we do with the algorithm in terms of that data? So that's a project that we're always looking at and something that we're always working on. We've not given up, but we're really clear about not wanting to throw out good matches and not wanting to honor what I'll call a he said, she said system. Tanking is really controversial. And as you imagine, it's really hard to substantiate a claim. So this is a tricky one, but I like to acknowledge it because I get that question a lot. Why doesn't the algorithm throw out tanked matches? Because it doesn't know which ones those are. It does not change dramatically. So what this means is, why aren't we publishing more regularly? Why don't we see the ratings go up and down a lot? It would impact teams. As you know, once you've established a team, it's really difficult if that rating changes mid-season. Adult levels don't change that dramatically. So generally speaking, we see players in the game maintain their rating for long periods of time. Of course, there are exceptions to this. You have new players who are learning and developing and who do improve rapidly. You also have some players who aren't playing as much and we see their ratings go down. But for the most part, when it comes to adults, their levels are not as volatile as what we see in juniors. The goal is a general level of play accuracy with NTRP. What we're really trying to do is support the league program, which is a broad grouping of players that generally share a skill level. So if we were to publish more regularly, that could be problematic with regard to that general intention. They do not publish more than once a year. Again, that would be highly disruptive to team structure. Important to remember that every league across the country has a different time frame. So even if it were okay to publish in May for New England, that may be right in the middle of Georgia's season. So we have to be really careful about when we publish because someone's always playing somewhere. So that's why we have the once a year publish, and that holds for an entire year for the next player. The other reason we don't change ratings more than once a year is that this would alter the focus from the role of ratings in leagues. It would distract. Really what the ratings do for leagues, again, is group players for general level-based play. What happens when players are looking at ratings in the hundreds, and we know this from looking at third-party rating sites, we also know this, I'm very intimate with behaviors around UTR and how other players are using that, there becomes this illusion that that rating is super, super important. And the fact that, I'm going to pick on Pete, the fact that I'm a 3.17 and Pete's a 3.16, that means that I'm better than Pete. And really what that means is that in my most recent match play, the outcome suggested that I have a slightly higher rating for right now. It does not mean that you take to the bank wholesale that I am a better player than Pete. So the role of rankings is easily misinterpreted sometimes. And if we were to publish daily or more frequently in hundreds, we would see people relying far too much on that detail in hundreds, which, as I said, would really distract from the purpose of ratings. We've also seen players or captains inadvertently not realizing how much emphasis they're putting on the ratings versus really paying attention to the strengths of their players, irrespective of the rating. What is that player really good at, and why do I want them on the court for this match versus just looking at the rating for information? So I realize we're all different and everybody wants the ratings for different reasons, but this is one of the things that we've seen patternistically around player behavior. It's not to say it'll never happen. It's something, again, we're always reviewing and analyzing, but it's something we're very sensitive to in the leagues and the rating space. And again, you see that hard to manage rating level changes mid-season. We'd have to really change the entire regulation policy around ratings and our league structure if we were going to publish on a regular basis. How does the algorithm work? I'm going to walk through very high level, very generally speaking, how the NTRP ratings are calculated. We get this question a lot. So I think it helps to understand what the algorithm is trying to do. What the algorithm, generally speaking, does is it looks at a player's rating before a match, and it looks at the other player's rating before a match, so whether that's an opponent or two sets of opponents, and it predicts the outcome. It says, I think player A or partnership A is going to defeat partnership B with a result of 6-2, 6-3. And then what it does is take the actual outcome of that match and compare it to its prediction and change the ratings accordingly. That's pretty much how every ELO tennis rating system works. So it's not anything super proprietary or shocking that that's how it does it. The system says, what do I think is going to happen? What do I know about these players? What actually happened? And it mildly calibrates each player's rating based on what actually happened on the court. So everything about tennis ratings is relative. That means if I don't know anything about my opponent, I don't know anything about me necessarily. So that's where the start rates and the zero rates come in. We'll talk about those in just a few minutes. What you'll see then is dynamics for, so in order to start generating dynamic ratings, a player has to have 4 match results. So until they have 4 matches against a non-self-rated player, they're not generating those dynamics. That's a simple way of describing it. There's a lot of nuance in there, but generally speaking, That's how it works. And at year end, you need to have 3 matches. So you don't have to have had dynamics generated during the year to have 3 matches count towards your year-end rating. So those calculations are actually completely different algorithms. They work independently. So you could have 4 matches against self-rated players during your season, and that's it. That's all you played. And so you didn't generate dynamics. However, you've had those 3 required matches, you will generate a year-end rating. So the reason I share that is because we get that question a lot about how many matches it takes. So I wanted to make sure people had that information. Other components of the algorithm include things like play history. What do we know about you? How long have you been in the system? And what rating information do you bring with you from your historical play at USTA? The other thing we look at is your partner rating and their status. So again, that self-rating plays a big role because of the importance of relativity. When a player is brand new in the system and is self-rated, you'll notice, or a lot of you know, and I saw this in the questions, which means you're well educated, those dynamics may not get generated because that self-rated player is still being established in our system and the algorithm doesn't know what number to give them yet. So it's not going to give you as the opponent a number because it wants to make sure it's confident in the number it's giving you. So it's not a punishment for anybody. It's not a reflection on the self-rated player. It's designed only because the algorithm calculates very accurately. And the reason it does that is because it holds pause on those establishing players. So I hear some concerns about players not being rated against self-rated players right away. It's actually in your best interest when it comes to accuracy that we don't generate until we know a lot more about that brand new player. We also look, like I said, also look at your partner and your opponent. It's all a factor in each calculation. Weighting, so different results count a little bit different. The only thing I will say here is that your championship results, people ask this question a lot. Do championship results count different than other matches? They do. That's all I can tell you. But I can tell you that the algorithm does look at those championship results. And start rates. I want to talk a little bit about start rates. When you're a player in the system, you carry information with you. When you're a self-rated player, you don't have information associated with you. So your start rate is 0. And I'll talk a little bit more about that again in a minute and why that's important. But again, we don't know anything about you. So we're keeping a clean slate. We're keeping that 0 with you as you start to play in the system. What it does not look at, win-loss record. So we also get this question a lot. Why doesn't my win-loss record, or does my win-loss record affect my rating? Because everything is relative, you could win every single match and not move up a level, because if you're at the higher end of a level and you're continually playing players that are at the lower end of that same level and you're winning as the system predicts and expects, then you will continue to generate very similar dynamics because you're defeating players that it suspects you will defeat because they're lower rated. So you could win all those matches and not move up. Conversely, you could lose all those matches and not move down for the very same reason. You're lower than everybody else and you're losing matches the system thought you would lose, so you're not moving down. So that's why we don't see the win-loss record impact on the ratings. Playing up, one of the things we hear a lot about is players playing up. They want to improve their ratings, so they're going to play in a higher level league. Playing up really can be a great way to stretch your game. It can be a great way to have a good playing experience. It helps facilitate teams in areas where there aren't high populations. It's important to note that I think playing up is a really important decision. Just because a player is playing up doesn't mean they're going to have a good play experience or that their opponents and teammates are going to have a good play experience if they are truly out of level. And simply because a player is playing up does not mean their rating will go up. They need to be able to perform at that higher level in order to bring up that rating. So I wanted to make that point. The other thing is intentional loss. So this ties back to the tanking conversation. We see sometimes players try to strategically lose because they think it will help them with their rating. And oftentimes it does not have that effect. More so it has effect on their reflection on their integrity as a player. It reflects on the quality of play that the league and the team as a whole are experiencing. But what we often find is that we have enough information on those players in the system to know, for the algorithm to know that they need to stay at a different level. And so that those intentional losses are really not a good idea. And that does include charity games for those, for those tougher matches. Frequently asked questions. How are ratings generated? So we did go through that already using the algorithm. What is the dynamic rating? So I'll talk a little bit about a dynamic rating. A dynamic rating is the rating that the system generates on a given day. And it's a snapshot of how a player performed on a given day. So every night, TennisLink churns on all the information that's entered in that system that day, and it produces a dynamic rating for every player that's in the system on that day. So that dynamic rating will change. Again, every single day, everybody's dynamic rating changes. Really what that is used for is for our DQ process. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the dynamic ratings help us make sure that players are performing in level. Year-end ratings are calculated once a year. They use the championships and national championships as benchmarks, which means we use those to tell us how to rate everyone against those high-performing players that went to national championships. So the difference is the dynamic is really a little bit more like a daily / snapshot rating. That year end is we put everything in the bank. We took everything we knew about you, including your rating history, how you performed, everything that happened in championships, and we use a slightly different algorithm to generate that year end rating. So that's what the difference is between those two. When are they not generated? We covered that. So for players playing fewer than 3 matches in included leagues or tournaments, you do not receive a year-end rating. And for players playing against self-rated players that are brand new, you will not receive a dynamic rating. How do players move up and down? So we get this question a lot. Players are trying to do something with their rating. They're trying to figure out how to get it higher or lower, and they haven't figured out how to do that. Players move up and down by consistently generating dynamic ratings at a higher or lower level by exhibiting the skills of that higher or lower level. There is not a trick to dropping your rating. There's not a trick to bringing it up. It is consistency of performance in one level or another. Doubles. So the reason I put that doubles question up there is I get the question about why doubles partnerships do not move up and down together. It's because when I was talking about how the algorithm works on just the other slide, I mentioned things like play history, other league play, sometimes tournament play is included in some of the sections. And so because we're doubles partners, maybe we play together quite a bit, but maybe I have a history with USTA and maybe you don't. And that history ties into my rating, and it can affect how I move up or down and how you move up or down. So there's no rule in the algorithm that says because players played together, they must have the same level in the calculation. The calculation operates independently for those players, and all of that information is included. So another way to say that is that if both you and I are brand new to the USTA play system, and we both self-rate at the same time, and we both play together every single match, and neither of us have any other play, then we will move up and down together because we're essentially sharing our results. We're sharing those match results. But again, that's the only case in which you'll see those players would end up coincidentally with the same rating because they don't have any other differences in their play or their play history. Which of my USTA play results are included in New England? It's adult, adult other, tri-level, and mixed other. And I mentioned this on another slide too, I'll cover it again. And up until now, tournaments have not been included. There's a new regulation that moving forward after this year, NTRP adult tournament results will be included in the calculation. Why doesn't USTA publish dynamic ratings? You know, this one really, as I said before, is really an interesting conversation because there's a lot of really valid points around this request. Players want to see how they're doing. They want to see, captains want to see how the players on their team are doing. Are they moving up? Are they moving down? Which results affected their rating in which way? And this is could be a really nice way for players to engage with their information and engage with the system. The other side of this coin is, again, the distraction, the overemphasis on ratings, the exclusion of certain players who may not have a certain rating level, management of lineups, players managing their rating. If they're looking at their dynamic and they want to dominate at a certain level, really watching those dynamics closely to try to tank those matches and force that rating down. Those are the things that we're trying to avoid, because, as I said before, they're so extraordinarily impactful when they happen. We really want to make sure we're avoiding them. So again, it's not something we don't talk about. We talk about it all the time. What we're trying to figure out is the right way to do it without those undesirable effects. There's another question on here. When do ratings expire? Ratings expire after 2 years of no play. This is for C ratings, sorry. C ratings expire after 2 years of no play for 60 and over players. For players under 60, C ratings with no play expire after 3 years. And self rates will expire after 2 years if that player does not generate a rating within those 2 years. DQs and appeals. What is a dynamic disqualification? A dynamic disqualification is a scenario whereby a player's dynamics consistently indicate out of level play. Why do we have disqualifications? We have disqualifications because the league program is competitive, and it's based on players having a desire to participate in a recreational program that offers them reliable and competitive play. To the best of our ability, we want to try to keep players in the right level. That's for their experience and development as a player, as well as the experience of the players on their team and their opponents. So that process is in place because we allow for things like self-rate and appeals, and it helps us keep those players ensured that they're at the right level of play. It is designed for that purpose and that purpose only. It is not intended to be punitive. It's not intended for any other reason than that right level of play. How does someone get disqualified? So another question I get about disqualifications quite a bit is, who decides? No one decides. Disqualifications are purely computer decisions. So the computer has a report that coordinators can take a look at, and it tells them what players are generating for dynamics and where those strikes are. And when a player hits 3 strikes, they appear in a certain way and they are moved out of level. It's important to note a couple of things here. There are no exceptions to this. A coordinator cannot decide to DQ a player without those strikes, nor can a coordinator decide not to DQ a player that does have the strikes. This is something that we're very rigid on and is consistent across all the sections. This is how it works for everybody. Another important thing to note about the strikes is that they fall into a range that we refer to as clearly above level. So a player that's generating dynamics a little bit higher than their level, and I'll give you an example. Maybe I'm a 3-0 self-rated player, and I'm playing and I'm generating 3.02 dynamics. Those will not generate strikes. The strikes only come when I'm generating ratings that are well into the next level. And again, these strikes reflect consistent indication that a player is way out of their level. So I can't tell you what the strike thresholds are, but I want to make sure people understand, again, this is not designed to be punitive. We really try to be as practical as possible with this difficult process, and that being slightly out of level is not going to disqualify a player. It's the consistency of being well out of level that does that. Who can be disqualified? Anyone who's self-rated or has an A. So that means they have an appeal of some sort associated with their rating. They are susceptible to disqualification. Players that are C-rated, M-rated, T-rated, and are not playing in an included league. cannot be disqualified. So for example, and I say included in the dynamics, 65 and over, mixed, we don't dynamically just DQ in those areas. What happens when a player is DQ'd? Well, they have to play at a different level. They receive a DQ designation on their rating. And in New England, all of their matches are reversed. So for that player that was playing out of level and that's determined by their DQ, their match results get reversed in the system. That is a section to section decision. So that is as far as I can answer that question. Additional questions about it can be directed to New England. Appeals, we got a lot of questions on appeals from New England. So I'm happy to answer this. There's a few different types of appeals out there. We have self-rate appeals. So what that means is you complete the self-rate form and you're not sure the rating you got was correct. If the system won't let you change it, in some cases you can, you want to go up a level or something like that, the system will let you do that. But if it really doesn't feel right to you, you can submit a form that gives us additional information. What this process does is enable manual intervention by a committee to review your personal information and decide if you should be eligible to play at a different level. Automatic appeals. These are for players that have a computer rating that's not expired, and it's based on a table of eligibility. Are they close enough to the level they want to play at? How many matches have they played? How old are they? There's several different data sets in the table, and the system knows automatically if a player should be granted or denied based on the information that's in that table and based on the rules that we follow for age-related number of matches and rating in hundredths eligibility. Important to note on the automatic appeals, the system will use your most recent year-end rating in hundredths. So for those of you who are playing frequently and generating dynamics and continuing to click the appeal button because maybe you've achieved the level that you're hoping in your dynamic and the system will let you appeal, it's important to note that it's still looking back at a single data point. It's looking back at that most recent year-end rating in hundredths. So no hope of that appeal status being changed by clicking that button multiple times. Manual appeals, we do have a process for extenuating circumstances or incorrect results or anomalies that can be submitted to the section or your local coordinator. So if you think you have reason to request an appeal based on one of these situations, as I said, an anomaly or incorrect results or something like that, you can submit and the section will review. And if they believe that there is an unusual situation related to results or something in the system, they will send it up to national for review. We do also have a year-end appeal process this year only. So where USTA decided they would not publish 2020 year-end ratings, we did develop a temporary manual year-end appeal process. US players have no way to know if you're eligible because we have to look at your dynamics, but I can tell you what you do need to have. You need to have play at least 3 matches during the year of 2020. You need to have a rating going into 2020, so a 2019 year-end rating. And then there's a whole lot of rules around it from there. So if you think you may be eligible and you want more information, happy to help with that. But we have to submit those and process them manually, so they take some time. There's more information also in the COVID-19 League NTRP Q&A on the USTA.com site as well, if there's more questions about that year-end appeal. That will go away at the end of this year when we publish year-end ratings. It's a temporary provision for players who are generating dynamics in a different level and again, meet a set of criteria that indicate they can be eligible for that temporary manual appeal. We recently had a 70 and over rule change. So basically what this did was loosen the parameters for players over 70 and their eligibility to appeal. So if you're over 70 and you've tried in the past and you were not eligible, you can go ahead and try to click that appeal button again and see if that changes for you. If it doesn't change, then you're not within the parameters. 80 and over rule change. This one's brand new for players who are over 80. This one's not in the system yet. We're working on getting this one built into Tennis Link, but if you're over 80 or you have a player who's over 80 and has questions about appealing their rating down, they may very well be eligible. 80 and over are able to appeal down. So, and that's the regulation now. Myths. All of my USTA results are included in my rating. We did touch on this one. So in New England, it's adult, adult other, tri-level, mixed other, and after this year tournaments. My win-loss record determines my rating. Again, we covered this one. It's really about relativity and the other players against whom you play rather than your win-loss record. I can increase my level by playing up. We talked about that. You have to perform at the higher level in order to bring your rating up. I can sit out and my rating will go down. This is not how it works. When a player sits out and lets their rating expire, they are then prompted to self-rate. The system has a special lookup. So even for players who try to create a new account to get out of that play history, the system has an additional lookup for you in addition to the membership duplicate check to try to find any play history that matches you so that it says we have history on you and we're not going to let you self-rate at a lower level. If you really think it's been a long time since you've played and for a variety of reasons, you really feel that your rating has gone down since your last rating on history with the USTA, you can submit a manual appeal for your self-rate. But generally speaking, players maintain their level very well, even over a long period of time. So sitting out does not help your rating drop. My self-rating is factored into my dynamic and year-end ratings. We also hear this one a lot. But I self-rated at a 3.0. How did I get a 3.5 or whatever it may be? The self-rating is designed to help players find the right level of play. And it helps us determine to the best of our ability with an objective questionnaire where they should start to play. That's all that form does. It doesn't assign you a number in the algorithm. It just says, Heather, you should play at a 3.5 level. And that's all it does. So it tells the system where to let me register. And that's where I'm allowed to play. But that 3.5 does not become part of the algorithm as it's determining my rating. All of my matches should be competitive since we are all at the same NTRP level. Really important to note that NTRP levels actually have 50 levels of play in each of them. So here's an example. In the 3.5 level, a player can be anywhere from 3.01 to 3.50. So as you can see, this is not necessarily the 3.01 against the 3.50 is probably not going to be as competitive a match as what we would see between the 3.25 and the 3.50 range. And the same here, 3.01 to 3.25. So one of the next obvious questions is, well, why don't we run leagues at half levels? That has to do with population size of an area. That has to do with how we would run the leagues. We'd have to double everything. Many areas couldn't run leagues that are that finite. Some areas of the country do because they have a strong enough player population and infrastructure to support it. But at national, we're not going to change that. What we have at the far ends, the 3.01 to the 3.50 is what we call compatible play. It's going to get a decent match. It's fair that you're playing each other. But probably that 3.50 is going to win against that 3.01 in this example that you see here. I hope that helps explain why some matches are a little bit more predictable than others when we're playing all at the same level. So here we go into that definition of competitive. This is a match where the outcome is predictable. Compatible is a match where the outcome is unpredictable. Competitive is where the outcome is unpredictable. And compatible is where the outcome is predictable, with the higher rated player winning routinely. Changing levels. Another thing we hear a lot is my rating's wrong now because I'm losing. And what happens is when a player graduates to the next level, play is more difficult, and they're probably over the what we call over the cusp, or they're just over the line for that next higher level. So maybe I was a 3.47 and now I'm a 3.52. I'm a legitimate 4.0 player and I'm competing with 4.0 players. It's going to be difficult for me. I'm used to dominating and winning at the 3.5 level. Now I've graduated and I'm going to be working much harder and learning new skills as I evolve in that 4.0 level. So as players change levels, it is expected that they will not have the same kind of record that they had at the lower level. This is actually a victory. It's a growth. It's showing that you've gone to the next level of play. But just that reminder that your wins may be fewer when you change levels like that. We're going to talk about other rating sites. So I'll bring Tennis Record up first. So Tennis Record, many of you indicated in your questions that you like Tennis Record, that you use Tennis Record, and that you go there to look at your ratings. Tennis Record is not USTA affiliated. We don't give them any information. They do not have the correct algorithm. They do not include the correct results. They don't have our player data. They don't have contact information from us. I don't know where they got their contact information, if they've reached out to you. They have attempted to determine what the algorithm is without having actual information. I think because they look like the NTRP ratings, people think they're close. I can tell you that anywhere from 40 to 60% of the time, they're at least an entire level off. So really important for captains and players. If you want to look, that's really an individual prerogative, but definitely not something to take to the bank, and definitely not something to to use in an appeal or an inquiry or anything like that. It's just simply they're not NTRP ratings. They don't have the same algorithm or the same data that they're using. So not a valid result. TLS, Tennis League Stats, the same thing. They don't have the algorithm. They don't have the data. They've really fallen behind, with Tennis Record being much more dynamic than TLS was, but we still hear about them sometimes. Both of these have had dramatic drops in their site traffic in the last couple of years. We saw Tennis Record peak in 2018. Year end 2018, we saw a lot of traffic around Tennis Record, both on social media and in our channels like this, where we were educating. We worked really hard to educate players against it. And what we saw at year end was fellow players educating each other on why they received a different year end rating from NTRP than they thought they were going to get, because they were looking at Tennis Record. So people have really sort of fallen out of favor, realizing it's not a good place for them to get information about their NTRP. ITF World Tennis Number, maybe some of you have heard, the ITF is getting ready to launch a new global tennis number. The USTA has been working with the ITF since 2018. The project kicked off in March of that year. We've served on a steering committee where we're helping develop requirements, principles, philosophies, and helping to architect and test the algorithm for a world tennis number that will include all players, all abilities, all regions of the world, and both genders. As of this afternoon, I heard from the ITF, we now have over 105 federations that have signed agreements with the ITF. So this is a really exciting project. As a tennis rating lover, it's an absolutely monumental project, but we're not replacing NTRP with it. NTRP has been with us in our league program for 40 years, almost 40 years, and we're going to keep it. So what we're doing with the World Tennis Number is helping the ITF test, and we're applying it in the junior space. And some of you may have seen we just launched an alliance with the ITA, so we're starting to understand ratings in the collegiate space as well. So it's very exciting opportunity for us. Those of you who want to learn more, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk about it. But again, we're not looking to replace NTRP for the adult league program. And UTR, we get a lot of questions around UTR as well. UTR is, I almost describe UTR and NTRP like one is a wrench and one is a pair of pliers. They look similar when glanced at, but when you really need the right tool for the job, you need to pick which one you're going to use. These are different algorithms that serve different purposes. The UTR is a precision rating. It's published daily to the hundredths because where it is used, it's needed in that way. It's used for short-term, highly competitive play. And some of you may know it's used in the recruiting space as well. So that intensity around that rating and that looking at it constantly with every little change, it has its downsides when it comes to player behavior, but it's a really, really good tool for its place. NTRP is an excellent tool for placing players in groups in the league program. So they really are very different purposes and both equally accurate products. We run analysis on UTR predictability. So what this means is how often did the higher rated player win the match? Generally, that's what the analysis is. And we run the same with NTRP ratings in the hundredths. And some of you may be surprised to learn that the NTRP ratings in the hundredths for adult players perform statistically much better than UTR when it comes to predictability. Now, with high performance youth, UTR takes the cake. So as you can see, we certainly they each have their value. They're each great algorithms. They're calibrated to serve different constituencies. And as a result, when you really get close and you put it under the microscope, you can see some of those differences and those nuances. One is not better than the other. Here's where we get into the local questions. So this is going to be a little bit of a speed round. There's a lot of, oh, I can hide that much better. Okay. There's a lot of questions in here. So I'm just going to move relatively quickly through these questions for all of you. And I know I see a lot of activity in that Q&A and that chat. So I'll try to get through those as well. I'm also going to share my email and contact information at the end of the presentation so folks can feel free to reach out with individual questions. I want to make sure what we're covering is good for the group. Given the rise of UTR and sites that scrape USTA website to provide precise ratings, is the USTA considering publishing precise data? So we've touched on this a few times. No plans in the short term to publish daily ratings in the hundredths. However, we are asking ourselves what information is helpful. If we didn't publish daily, what sort of things could we do that would provide more information? And are there other ways for players to engage with their results and their rating other than just that daily in hundredths publication? But they really have caused us, UTR really has caused USTA to ask ourselves a lot of these great questions around digital engagement and player data. So I really appreciate this question. Would the USTA consider requiring that both players on the doubles one be in-level players to preserve the integrity of the level? So we haven't talked about it much. We do sometimes. I think there's a couple of things that come into play here. We try to avoid too many of these types of rules, but also we don't currently have any rules about who has to play on which line. So now that we don't have plus leagues, I should say. So we don't have this rule. I'll take this question back to the team for discussion, but right now we don't have any of that. What will happen to matches played in early 2020? So when we run year-end ratings at the end of 2021, we're going to include full 2 years of data. So every match that was played in included leagues and tournaments in 2020 will be included in the calculation that runs at the end of 2021. So instead of running on a single year, it will run on 2 years worth of data. So those match results will be included. Fluctuations in NTRP ratings are difficult to understand or explain to team members. We need transparency on the algorithms. No, this is definitely a common thread, and it's something we get a lot of questions about is transparency. My hope is that with trainings like this evening's, we can help get a little bit more information in there that will help answer some of these questions. If there are questions about a player's rating and answers are not satisfactory, please raise them up through your section, through your local coordinator, to your section. Really, we want to serve you and make sure your questions are answered. So while we're not going to give you a readout of everyone's dynamics, what we can do is really look at your particular situation and see if we can give you a little bit more detailed information if you're feeling really stumped or like something just doesn't feel right about your rating, don't hesitate to ask for customer support on that. That's part of what we do here. And Pete knows we're happy to handle those at National as well. We do a lot of that work for players case by case, because that's part of our job and how we serve our playing constituency. General questions, appeals, NTRP accuracy versus UTR. I covered off on that one. Lack of properly vetting self-rated players. D1 player is supposed to get a 4-5, they name change. Yeah, this is a tough one. You know, there are integrity issues where players change their name, or they, you know, do something with their profile so that they can hopefully get away with a different rating. We do everything in our power to catch them with the system. If the system doesn't catch them, we have a grievance process. This is where it comes down to player behavior. If someone's intentionally creating a new account or intentionally falsifying information, that's really hard to manage. So that's why we have that grievance process. And, you know, the self-rate questionnaire does a beautiful job placing players in level. It's not 100% because it's an objective form. It can only do so much with so much information. So while we're always analyzing and trying to tweak that process, we do acknowledge there's a small margin in there where a player may end up at a level that's slightly different than the level they generate at year end. To be honest, it doesn't happen very often, but it does happen a little bit of the time. And unfortunately, players do things maliciously or surreptitiously. And the best thing I can offer here is call it out. We would like to see an Android app for Tennis Link. So for those of you who don't know, Tennis Link is going away. You will continue to have the Leagues app on Apple devices, but USTA will not be investing in an Android app for Tennis Link. In the next couple of years, we're going to start migrating to a new platform. And part of that migration will include a new mobile system that is, not only is the new system mobile compatible, but we'll also have a mobile app that will be available on Apple Android. That's, again, a couple of years out. We're right now migrating on the tournament side. Leagues will be the last to migrate for a lot of reasons. They're very large, so we want to get everything right before we get you guys over there. But unfortunately, for now, in the next couple of years, we will not have an Android app for Tennis Link. When will the new rating system be in place to replace the current NTRP system? So I think this is referring to WTN. And again, we don't intend to replace NTRP with WTN as we see it today. We are, as always, NTRP has had a lot of care and feeding over the years, and we are continuing to invest in and monitor and do what we can to improve the NTRP system. So it's not going anywhere, and we're going to continue to do that. Another general question about USTA appeals and ratings for 20 and 21. I think I covered that. Criteria for DQ for a self-rated player well overperforming in their rating. So we talked a little bit about that, is the need for them to generate those 3 strikes that indicate they're clearly above level. Playing against a self-rated player, does your match not count towards your rating? So I'm going to go a little bit deeper here because we've talked about this a few times. When a self-rated player first starts, they basically have a 0. The algorithm doesn't know what to do with them, as I said, so they don't have a rating. After that self-rated player has played against a rated player at least 4 times, they become something that we call established. And after they become established, then we can start using their results to generate dynamics and ratings. So just because a player has an S next to their name, it doesn't mean that no one who plays them will ever generate a dynamic. It has to do with those first 4 matches. But there's a lot of nuance in there, because if a self-rated player is playing a self-rated player, or there's doubles play and someone on the court is self-rated, there's a lot of different pieces in there that can prevent that rating from being included in the dynamics. So it's a lot of information, but I know this is a really tricky one to figure out. And I saw a lot of this in the questions from New England. So I hope that helps a little bit there. Established partner taking on a new lower rated partner and has a higher win rate with the new partner How is their rating affected? This is a really great, really complicated question. The algorithm doesn't, how do I say this without saying too much? The algorithm treats them all the same. So the fact that it's a new lower rated partner or they have a higher rated history, that doesn't change how the algorithm is calculating their rating. It's treating it the same way it does no matter what. Now, this one to me sounds like there's something very specific that someone wants to know about what's going on. So this may be one that's good to email me about so we can take a look and see if I can give a better answer, because that felt a little bit general, but I also can't give a lot about how the algorithm works in the double space. Again, it's proprietary and it's really important that we keep that protected. I would tell you more if I could. As an example is a player who self-rated 3-0 in September of 2020, has had 13 matches and won 12 of them fairly convincingly against known good players in the league. I am curious why the system doesn't identify someone with that record after self-rating. So this is an interesting one. The player is probably identified and consistent with everything that we've talked about, relatively speaking, they're generating in the 4-0 range. They haven't struck out. Just because they're winning and defeating, their rating may be a little higher than some of those other players if we look at their rating in hundreds, but they're not generating those clearly out of level DQs. The USTA stated that it would not be performing rating reassessments in November of 2020. However, I have seen at least 2 instances in which long-time computer-rated 3-5 players suddenly received a 4-0 rating in early 2021. At least one unofficial site shows them having appealed their prior rating. So again, not sure what information those unofficial sites have or where they're getting it, but important not to go there to get your information. What I will say is I did mention before that 2020 year-end appeal process that's specific just to the COVID circumstance. So those players likely submitted an appeal request, a review request, and had the information that supported their ability to now play at a higher level. My partner and I are really trying to move up to 3-5, and I feel like we keep getting penalized because of the level of opponents. We either play someone rated so low that a win won't move us up, or we play someone who's self-rated and doesn't move us. So I think this is a really good point, and I wanted to read it because you're right. If you are playing someone who's at the lower end of your level and you're winning, it doesn't move you up. If you're playing someone who's self-rated and they're in those first few matches, it won't affect your rating. You can't control who you play against. So, this is not necessarily a common scenario, but it is one of those that is just, unfortunately, without that information, we don't have enough information in the system to algorithmically move a player up. So until we find other ways and other data points to use to change ratings, this will be a scenario that continues. So sorry to hear that you guys are not moving up and you want to. Again, I invite you to email me directly so that I can take a look and see what I can find. I like specific examples because it really helps us understand some of the edge cases in the algorithm as well. When ratings come out, is there anything to do to appeal other than just clicking the appeal button? If you think you have an anomaly, you can request a manual appeal. There is the medical appeals. So for players that have extenuating and permanent medical conditions, you can work with your local coordinator to see if you may be eligible for their medical appeal process. It's a lengthy process. We don't want people taking advantage of it, but that may be another option as well. Regarding team rosters in TennisLink, is it possible to give a more descriptive rating than is currently provided? For example, 3.5C, A, or S, rather than just the 3.5. So what I did with this one is I submitted this to our development queue, and I'm going to find out if we want to prioritize it as an enhancement. So the way it works is it goes to a group of people who own the product, and they review the inquiries, and they determine how big they are to build, and then they decide if they're going to put it in TennisLink. I thought this was a fair request for review, so it's been submitted. So thank you for sending your request. Who to contact? So when we have any variety of questions, I wanted to make sure there was a reminder about where to go with these questions. So when your question is rules, regulations, grievances, detailed rating inquiries and appeals, start with your local coordinator. If you have membership renewal, purchase, or duplicate issues, you can go to memberservices@usta.com. Link Team can help you with tennis link access, error messages, and registration problems. And there's my information right there. I always get a really nice influx after sessions like this, and I love it. It means that people have more questions. It means that they have feedback for me, and I value that very much. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be directly in front of people and serving through this kind of information workshop. So that's why I put my information out there. I want to be accessible, and I want people to feel like they're getting their questions answered. So there's a lot of questions in here. What I'm going to do is jump out of the PowerPoint and pull the panel back up, and then I will I'll sort of click through those questions and see if I can answer them on the fly. Sometimes that's a little bit challenging because they can be lengthy or unclear. So forgive me as I work through these. How often do self-rated players get bumped up before the annual review? I've seen several players dominate and then get bumped up only annually and then dominate again. They only get bumped up if they generate those strikes for DQ. We look at it every day because we run those dynamics every single day. So they'll get bumped up if they're generating the ratings that indicate they should be at a higher level. I don't know how else to answer that, unfortunately. Once you establish a self-rated player, do you go back and assign other players ratings for the first few matches, or is that done only going forward? It is retroactive. Great question. Can you put contact into the chat so we can copy? Yes. Give me just a second. I'm multitasking here. I'm just going to type it in there really quick. I want to make sure people have it. Okay, there you go. More questions. Oh, looks like we moved those to answered. And there were some Q&A, but now I've lost them. Christy, Peter, do you know where they went?
I think, and Pete, you had answered.
I tried to answer them as we were going along. If you look at the tab that says answered, you can scroll through it and decide whether you wanted to add something.
Okay, awesome. So no, this is great. And it looks like, and you answered these, you said you typed the answers?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Fantastic. That was really helpful.
I do think that, Pete, did you see any that didn't get answered that you had gone through there? Because I do think somebody had raised their hand as well. I wanted to get to him.
There are a couple here in the chat. It's do tri-level and mixed count towards ratings. Tri-level does count towards the ratings, and mixed counts towards mixed ratings, but not for the adult. And do we have to renew our USTA membership if we could not play in 2020 due to COVID? You want to answer that one, Christy? Or you want me to? The answer is yes.
Right. Yeah, this is good. It looks like there's a lot of these that got answered, so that's fantastic. Thanks. Thank you. And I don't see new questions coming in, so we covered a lot of ground, you guys. We went through a lot, and that was excellent. I have to say, from all the sections, New England really has some educated and enthusiastic players. I got 2 pages of questions. It was excellent. So really glad that you all could attend tonight, and really appreciate the questions. And Danny, a question in there about extra weight for national and sectional. So that does have to do with the championship play. So relative to how a match is coded, is it a championship match? That does have a factor in the algorithm. And some of those championship matches are weighted slightly differently. That's all I can tell you there, but they are a little bit different.
So Heather, a couple more popped up into question and answer.
Great, here we go. Um, How does a singles win compare to a doubles win? What a great question. So they're the same. A league result, a tournament result, a singles win, a doubles win are weighted exactly the same in the algorithm. So it's a misperception that singles count for more when it comes to how the algorithm calculates. So it's a really great question. If a player is moved up to a higher level and is not doing well, how long does it take for them to move back down? A year. So yeah, so because we publish yearly, if a player, let's say they were a 3.5, moved up to a 4.0 and are having not a good experience and their dynamics are falling back down into that 3.5, it will be at the next year end that the algorithm will put them there. Now, again, remembering that their dynamics are calculating in that lower level, that's an important piece there. If I'm playing doubles and my partner is self-rated, how does that affect my rating? So Francine, that will come into play right as that self-rated player is brand new. It can, in some scenarios, cause a dynamic not to be generated for you. Again, this is the one that's got so much nuance around so many things. It's really hard to explain it all, but it can limit the number of dynamics you receive if you have a brand new, in their first 4 matches, self-rated player. But it also has to do with who else is on the court and their status and how new that self-rated player is. So there's a lot of moving parts in there.
And Heather, there's one in the chat, the last one in the chat.
Thought I got it.
Maybe I was focused on something else.
I answered the one about extra weight for national and sections.
Oh, okay, that was okay, that's what I was talking about.
I think, Mark McGuinn, are you able to unmute yourself and ask your question? You've had your hand raised for a while. If not, could you put your question in the chat?
There was another question in the chat about tanking, like why would someone intentionally lose? Pete, I don't know if you got a chance to answer that one, but sometimes people like to dominate at a lower level. So if I think I'm a 3.5 and I like winning and I'm afraid I'm gonna go up to a 4.0 and have more competitive matches, I may lose on purpose and try to keep my rating down to that 3.0 so that I can continue to dominate.
There's Mark. Hi, Mark.
I'm fine, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm good, thank you.
Okay, and then I think
You know-
Jackie had a question too. Jackie Donnelly.
While we're waiting for her to unmute, I just wanted to say one thing. You know, we're very fortunate having Heather here. I mean, she doesn't really say a lot, but she interacted with UTR quite a bit. So she really does understand a lot about how UTR operates, how the algorithm is different in that. And she was also deeply involved with the new world team number. So we're fortunate to have someone that has a broad spectrum of rating, knowledge, and expertise. So
Thanks, Pete.
yeah.
Yeah, we appreciate, this was really fantastic. This was so much information. And it is
Awesome.
a little after 8. So I'm going to say to everybody, if you have more specific questions, please send them to Heather and we will have Heather answer them. Or you can always contact myself or Pete at the section and we will do our best to answer them. But Heather, seriously, thank you very much for spending your time and putting this together and being with us on a Thursday night. I know it's a lot, so we do appreciate you coming out.
Yeah, thanks for putting it together. Like I said, I love this interface. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Have a great night.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Take care of the girls.
I will. Thank you.